You're watching F1 2022 Technical Analysis, brought to you by Aramco. Conventional wisdom has it that regulation changes in Formula 1 shake up the competitive order. So it's no surprise that arguably the biggest overhaul of the rules in F1 history in 2022 meant expectations were high. Yet despite profound changes to the technical regulations with the reintroduction of ground effect cars and the impact of wider changes to the sporting rules and the way F1 works financially, 2022 didn't look so different to 2021 when you look at the results. Yes, the pack was shuffled a little, but there was no leap to the front for a team that was struggling, a la Brawn in 2009, which had finished 9th in the 2008 standings as Honda. So, with F1's new regulations designed not only to allow the cars to run more closely, but also tighten up the competitive spread, why did this seismic change in the regulations not scramble the order as much as might be expected? While the competitive order wasn't identical in 2022 compared to 2021, the changes weren't any more significant than might be seen between two more conventional seasons. Mercedes slumped from first to third but still won a race in 2022 and remained part of a big three at the front. Ferrari re-emerged as a race-winning force, but that was part of a trajectory of recovery dating back to the various engine technical directives that cost it performance in 2020. And down the order, AlphaTauri dropped 3 places from 6th to 9th, with Alfa Romeo going in the opposite direction. But by and large, this was just a small shuffle within the established order. Midfield teams were still midfield teams, and the leading outfits still had a significant advantage over the rest. In fact, the top 3 increased its share of points scored from 69% to 78% in 2022 compared to 2021. 2022 was also one of the most dominant seasons in F1 history for Max Verstappen and Red Bull. Verstappen won a record 15 times, while Red Bull won 17 out of 22 races. This dominance was partly because Red Bull aced the new regulations, producing a car that wasn't prone to the porpoising problems that limited others and that dominated from mid-season onwards. That's thanks to it hitting on a concept that was less dependent on ultra-low ride heights and stiff ride that allowed it to develop unencumbered by porpoising troubleshooting, as well as reducing the weight of the car as the season progressed. That's no surprise given the strength of the team, but it is at odds with the hopes that the regulations would also close up the competitive order. That's a factor that, in itself, should have made the field more prone to being scrambled. The desire to tighten the competitive order was an explicitly stated aim of the rule changes. As the FIA's head of single-seater technical matters, Nicolas Tombassis, explained when the regulations were announced at the 2019 United States Grand Prix, simplification of the cars was intended to reduce the performance differentials. So has this worked? Well, if you take what Tombassis said literally and use the measure of the difference between the fastest and slowest car as the metric, then yes. In 2022, Williams was the slowest team, 2.6% off the pace on average. Last year, Haas was slowest, 3.3% down. That's a slightly limited metric given often the slowest team is having an unusually troubled season, and that was certainly the case with Haas and its 2021 car, which was based on minimal development to allow the maximum focus on 2022. However, it is respectable enough a starting point, and it was always expected to take time for these rules to fully close up the field. This is because of the baked-in advantages of years of investment both in facilities and building understanding of the underlying science needed to produce F1 cars. But over time, that effect will become more weak. Progress is a race that has no end. After every finish line, another challenge awaits. How can Aramco continue to push innovation in a sport at the forefront of technology? This is how. Discover how Aramco and the Aston Martin Formula 1 team aim to meet Formula 1's sustainable fuel targets. Aramco, powered by How. The current regulations package was always seen as part of a long-term shift in the way F1 works, rather than a quick fix. It's important to remember that it's not just about the technical regulations, but also the cost cap. While this was introduced in 2021, it was conceived as part of this rules revolution. It's just that when the technical regulations were deferred by a year because of the financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the financial regulations were not delayed. In fact, they were tightened up, with the cost cap figure reduced. The cost cap, the baseline figure for which is $140 million this year and drops to $135 million next year, was a key part of what Chase Carey, then F1 CEO, said in 2019 was all about creating a competition where how well you spent your money was more important than having more of it. As well as the cost cap, there are other measures. The aerodynamic testing regulations, known as the ATR, are also key to this. It's effectively a handicap system that awards the most wind tunnel and CFD research time to the worst team in the championship, decreasing in 5% increments as you move up the table. It's a big enough limitation to make a difference, but it's a small one and therefore will take time to have a big impact. As Tom Bassis explains, combined with the cost cap and the more equitable distribution of the prize money awarded to teams under the current Concord agreement, the effect can only be fully felt in the long term. So it was always expected that it would take time for this to manifest itself on track, ideally with all 10 teams having similar performance potential. That's why he argues 2022 has to be seen as a starting point. Tom Bassis is right to say that gaps are usually made bigger by major rule changes, initially at least. Of the 3 seasons he mentions, the gap from front to back for 2 of them was significantly larger than this year, with a similar pattern in 2017. The exception is 2009, which had a tightly packed spread on average, although Brawn started the season with a big performance advantage. Despite Red Bull's dominant season, 2022 was a qualified success as the start of a new rules era. The order may not have been scrambled dramatically and the competitive spread is still bigger than fans would like, but it's a good starting point. With spending controlled, the technical regulations offering limited opportunity for extracting increased aerodynamic performance, and the engine trees locking in similar performance across the 4 power unit manufacturers to the current relatively similar levels, it should get increasingly difficult to dominate. With the rules mostly stable for the next 3 seasons, we can expect things eventually to close up more. Then, in 2026, F1 will have its next rules overhaul that aims to build on the successes of this year's changes. Thanks for watching F1 2022 Technical Analysis, brought to you by Aramco.